All right, 𝐁𝐬.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Malaysian Education Online Lecture Series brought to you by the Malaysian Architecture Students Alliance, MASA. I hope everyone has had your meal and doing fine. Thank you all for joining us tonight and be ready as this will be a session you don't want to miss. My name is 𝐁𝐬, a MASA representative from UPM, and I'll be your moderator for today. For those who are new, MASA stands for Malaysia Architecture Students Alliance, and it is a non-profit student committee operating directly under Pertubuhan Arkitek Malaysia, or PAM, of student representatives from all architecture institutes in Malaysia. During the MCO, MASA intended to launch this for students to be more productive and to know more about the architecture world. Architect Arjanta is the head of PAM Education Committee and Dr. Carol is the convener. Now, I would like to introduce our speaker for tonight, Associate Veronica Ng. Currently, she is an associate professor and head of school at the School of Architecture and Design, Taylor's University. Dr. Veronica's interest lies in studies on contemporary architecture, place identity, sociology of space, and design methods in architecture. In addition, she is actively involved in the Malaysian Institute of Architects and held editorial roles for Architecture Malaysia and Architecture Asia magazine. She is also an writer who contributes actively to the national and international architecture and design magazines such as D+A, Cube, Folio, Habitus, and Australia. Now, reflecting on her past experience, Dr. Veronica is sharing 7 points on how to ace architecture education as a student. Architecture by nature is a subjective domain of study. When you are exposed to such a broad realm of designs, theory, and practices, how do you find the light? Most architecture students have these questions echoing in their minds. If I get an A this semester, how do I make sure I get one in the next one? Or a more common questions where students always have in their mind, how do I complete my time? How do I skip those sleepless nights in architecture education, survive studio? How do I improve? How do I make it work? Is there a method to knowing and learning what to do? Now, this talk shed some light on them, the perspectives on how to your breakthrough, the tipping point to move you from. Also, all right, now, so let's sit back, relax, enjoy this sharing. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comment section below, and we'll try to answer them during the Q&A session at the end of today's talk. Without further ado, let us welcome Dr. Veronica. Dr. Veronica.
Hi, 𝐁𝐬. Thank you for the introduction.
How are you?
And I'm good, thank you.
Have you had your meal?
Oh, yes, of course.
I see. All right. So that's great. So the floor is yours right now.
All right. Thank you, 𝐁𝐬. First of all, I would like to thank MASA to invite me to give a talk to dominantly architecture students. And this is actually one of the kind talk that I have that I'm actually giving. I have never given a talk of this nature. I would align what I'm talking to about more so like, you know, if you pick up a self-help book and you actually want to find a breakthrough for yourself. And today, I would actually like to share with you 7 points that is important to me when I was an architecture student. And I know I was an architecture student long time ago. Yeah, but I am only going to concentrate on points that still make a difference today, right? So I won't be talking about some old-fashioned stuff when I was a student. And these are also things that I continue to use at my workplace, and I believe it will benefit not only architecture students, but anyone who actually would want to find their breakthrough more so in the architecture discipline. So I would start my session now. Perhaps I would like to start by introducing myself. So firstly, if you look at the words to my right, you see there, I'm an architect by training. I'm a teacher. I teach architecture to students. I'm a researcher. I'm a writer. I'm a curriculum designer. I'm a trainer. I'm an auditor, and I'm an administrator. So you see that, and of course at home, I'm possibly a maid as well. However, how did I arrive here, and why did I arrive here? And that's because of the training as well as the experiences that I have gone through as a student, as an architecture student particularly, right through to the journey of working, and today multiple roles in my work. Yeah, so all these words that you see on my right are my current task at my work. Yeah, so I do many different things. And on this slide, you will see some of the magazines that I have contributed to over the years. I actually have the increased interest in actually writing, and I have actually written for numerous magazines, and I think that actually continues to improve how I see and how I analyze architecture. So that's about me. Yeah. And what about you? These are some notes that I took from Pinterest. And when I go through these notes, it's like, you know, at one point or at any one point in time, being an architecture student, you could resonate with one of these points. Especially there is never enough time, especially we own the night. Eat, drink, sleep, dream, bathe, walk, see, think, hear, breathe, feel, smell, live architecture. Like there's only one life. And today, this is the reason why I thought sharing 7 points to move you from dread to great is actually something very useful that you can take away with you today. When I entered into architecture school, this is what I see. Blackness, pitch black. And I'm a science stream student, and I go to a public school in my high school. And from school, entering into architecture was a shock to me, an utter shock that bring me to this black box. And as I progressed through my architecture education, this is slightly how I have improved in terms of how I feel. Particularly in my second year, I began to see some light. And in my third year, more so in my fourth year of studying architecture, I found that breakthrough. And this breakthrough is a personal breakthrough, yeah, and it may not apply to everyone. However, I think today what I'm sharing here is I have tried to, at best, try to generalize the 7 points that allow me to arrive at the breakthrough that I had as an architecture student, so that it will actually benefit all of you here today listening to this sharing session. So it is titled 7 Points to Move You from Dread to Great. And these 3 statements here really echo, and they are real statements, yeah? And it really echoes my personal experience being in architecture first year. On my first day of school, I remember I received this A4 paper, and apparently it's called the project brief. I don't understand what is that. What is the brief? And what should I do? So I put it in my bag and I didn't do anything. until my next class. So perhaps you were once like me. And after a few months into study, I remember perhaps I was still in semester 1, doing probably my second design project. My tutor asked me this: are you sure you want to study architecture? I was torn. I was like, what? And I took a step back and I thought, yeah, of course. I wanted to give up. And I constantly asked myself, in my semester 1, I got all C's. That was the lowest ever that I've scored for anything in my life. And I questioned myself, why am I scoring C's? I was an A student in my high school and it felt terrible. And life goes on. We continue to study our second year, our third year, and slowly I see that glimpse of light. And what do I now hear? I hear people always telling me she always finishes ahead of time. She always gets to sleep. I can't wait to see what she does. You have done a great deal of work. And more so, she draws like an angel. I have no idea. My tutor actually said that to me and I was shocked. Okay, but anyway, I took those words and of course I took it as a motivation, and that added to the thinking that perhaps I draw like an angel, but that doesn't really matter. So what I'm here today is to share with you. I'm here today to share with you the seven tipping points to actually get from dread to great. Yeah, and these are the 7 points that I will share with you today. The first one is the 20-80 rule. The second one is all about a strategy. The third one, I've bolded because I will spend a little bit more time, I think about 70% of the time in this number 3, which is called fake it till you make it. And number 4, creativity. Number 5, prove your purpose. Number 6, choosing your friend versus choosing your team. And number 7, finding your voice. So these are the 7 tips that I will share with you, and they are in no particular order. So I will now roll out the first point. The first point is actually called the 20-80 rule. And I didn't knew this exists as a student, but I actually practice it. So until I think about 5 years ago, I was on a project management training on how to write business case proposals. And I was introduced by our coach on this 20-80 rule, or called the Pareto Principle. You can just Google it and you'll get heaps of information about it. Basically, the concept is 80% of consequences comes from 20% of the causes. So what does that mean to me and what does that mean to you? It means that 20% effort yields 80% results. Or I could just change the words. For example, 20% strategizing yields 80% product. Or 20% input yields 80% output. Or that's the even better one, 20% work, 80% play. I mean, that's superb. The trick or the tipping point is you need to find this 20%. What is this 20% for you? And prioritize it. If you work on this 20%, you will get the 80% results. And for me, I'm going to share with you what is my 20% in the consecutive points. So the first point that I would like to share about what is this 20%, it's all about strategy. Of course, as architecture student, I teach design. So I tell my students, you need to show me your design process. We all know that, and you know that. And every time you try to sketch stuff on your butter paper or your sketchbook so that you have the design process. But what is it? For me personally, when I was studying, process is a system to me. And it's a system for thinking and a system for doing. And my process don't start with the idea. My process starts with the outcome. I don't mean the outcome of the form. I mean the outcome of knowing what objective is this project about. And I will try to just keep focusing on that objective. So if you look at this image here, you can see that to your right, it is the product. Yeah, it is not the process. But if you do not know what is the intent of the product, no matter how your process is, it's not going to work for you. So one of the tips that it always worked for myself is knowing what the intent of the outcome is. Yeah, not the form, not the shape, not how it would look like, but what is the main intention. And of course, in a lot of books that you see, people talk about design processes in different ways. Should you look at them? Personally, I would say, why not? But they are not Bibles. You will need to find one that suits yourself. And perhaps if there isn't one, you have to make one of your own. And how do I then make one of my own? I bring you to the third tip, and I will spend quite some time in this third tip. As I was trying to find evidence of myself for this third tip, I find that it was very hard for me. I don't have any architecture work with me. I still have my student portfolio, but they are in my office, and I haven't been to work for more than a year. So what I had was this small thing which I've done when I was in Curtin University. That was where I studied architecture, and I kind of like photograph it today and put it together so that there are a few slides on that. And you will also see some slides on things that I do now that resonate with what I have done in the past. So fake it till you make it. It works the best for me. Not for everyone, but for me, it works the best. If you Google this word, you will find that this phrase originates from psychology. This is how, sorry, I think someone is, yeah. Fake it till you make it is actually a strategy in psychology. That's how they teach people, for example, with mental disorder like anxiety, maybe small children who are not very confident, or small children who find difficulty to express themselves. And this statement is actually, I picked up this statement when I was going through a book on how to beat your anxiety. And one of the advice or the tip from that book was called fake it till you make it. And you will notice that the image that is often used is the unicorn. And unicorn gives a glimpse of hope and dream. And in this fake it till you make it, for me, I would like to share with you today 8 things that probably I would say I fake it till I make it, if you like, but don't take the word fake literally. It doesn't mean a bad connotation. It means follow through, adapt, adopt, practice. Yeah, so the fake word is not like an imitation kind of thing literally. So let me first start with the first 4. So you will see here a list of 4 things that I have practiced in my life of an architecture student. How do I learn to be an architecture student? And you will notice that none of these 8 things that I show is content that you have learned from your architecture school, your lecturer telling you that. Yeah, your lecturer will tell you how to find out things. And these are the things that I have found out that really benefited me and really allow me to cross the tipping point from one point to the other. So the first one is actually thinking. I would say that not that I didn't know how to think, it's just like I didn't know how to think like an architecture student, or more so didn't know how to think like an architect. But as I go through my architecture studies, I found that it is really important to think like an architect. And what do I mean by that? For me, to think like an architect, I have my idols, I have my heroes. And the three architects in the thinking column that you see here, they are my heroes for thinking. So I really love the work of Juhani Halasma. He talks about how to think about architecture from a sensory perspective, doesn't design, critiques and theorize. And the other side of that would be, I also really love how Stephen Hall think. Stephen Hall is slightly different. He also have works. So that allows me to immerse in the thinking a little bit better. And lastly, the last one is actually a writer, and a critic and a theorist, at heart an historian. He is Christian Norbert Schultz. They are all in the same camp. They are those who think about lived experience being the most important thing in architecture, and to them, that's what architecture is about. And I choose to think like them. Yeah, there are many different ways of thinking in the architecture discipline, and you can choose to think like whoever that best resonates with you. Yeah, and these three shaped a lot of my thinking when I am in my third year onwards. In the second column, you will see analyzing. I have one hero in analyzing, and he is Simon Unwin. I really love the things that he do. And if you're an architecture student, and if you haven't read the book Analyzing Architecture, please go and read it, because it will tell you what analysis is. And he also writes small anecdotal books like Children as Placemakers, Doorway, Shadow, and I think also Curve and Metaphor. And to me, that was so elementary, meaning he breaks it down to make it so simple, and it's all diagrammatic and sketches. And it made me understand what analysis is much more. And he's still my idol today, and I'll tell you why later. The third column, drawing. We all learn drawing classes in our Sem 1, but that's not enough. You have to express your drawing or express your design through your drawing. And I remember the tipping point for my drawing was in my third year, when I kind of like idolized Tom Main from Morphosis, and that shaped the way of how I approach my third year drawing. Unfortunately, I don't have those drawings with me today, but I will be sharing some of Tom Main's drawing later. And the fourth fake it till you make it thing that I did was writing. I know how to write essays. I learned in English in my SPM or in my Australian matriculation, but I don't know how to write about architecture. So I picked up some books and I learned how to write. And these are two very good books. If you're an architecture student, you want to know how to write, you can pick up these two books. But that did not really do it for me. What did for me the most was good architecture magazines. And I'm a fan of the Singapore Architect, or SA. And what I do is I will always just look at one article, and if I want to write something like that, I will break the structure of the article down to its least form, and I will try to use that structure to frame the article or the text that I would like to write. So perhaps it is something useful to you. If you like a particular writing, what you need to do is to dissect it, to cut it to its neatest form, and actually use it to shape what you want to write. And of course, we have the last four, which is narrating. As you know, architects are storytellers. And how do I learn my narration when I present design particularly? I learned it from an architect named John Heddick. He's not very popular, so you may not have heard of him, but one of my lecturers had introduced me to him because of my interest in the types of form and space that I kind of like always explore. So I was introduced to him, and at my time when we were students, we all adore Tadao Ando. We just love Tadao Ando, and we just always read and look his book. We eat, sleep, dream of his work. And the other work that is significant to me was a book on Japanese tea culture called In Praise of Shadows. That was also a very popular book that teaches the reader how to experience Japanese tea house with words. Okay, there is no images. And point number 6, speaking. You don't join architecture school knowing how to speak like an architect. Why? Because architecture language, learning architecture itself is like a language. The spoken words have its own jargons, have its own meaning, and you use words like portray, evoke, ambiguous, threshold, liminal. These are all words alien to the layman. And actually you can break it down to things like, you have to learn your nouns all together, you have to learn your verbs all together, and so on and so forth. And of course, the 7th column on methods. Methods is also very important on how you approach your design. And lastly, tectonics. I just noticed that I've been speaking very long. Actually, I've got some images with me. So now I will rewind back to the first fake it till you make it, and perhaps explain to you how it has shaped me. So the first point, thinking. What really happened to me was I began to be a very poetic person, and I think like a phenomenologist. So whenever I actually run a studio, that will be how the studio is like. Yeah, so I actually have begun to gather a way to think, to see, and to analyze place. And along the way, I have also kind of like used all these different other people's work to supplement my knowledge of actually analyzing places. And I actually use this while I'm an architecture student. And also how you observe, how you photograph as you go and do a site visit. So all this have impacted on me as an architecture student. And I would like to share with you, this is my work as a 5th year student. This is actually a thesis where I actually did, and it is actually on in Western Australia, and it's 3 places where each one actually looks at the physical conditions of a place, the community of a place, the meaning of a place, and the feeling and character of a place. So to my right, you will see an image. It's a very, very old copy of my thesis. It's 21 years old now. And this is actually how it looked like. And here you can begin to actually see the way narrative means to me, the way method means to me, the way spatial sequencing means to me. And actually each one of these pieces is actually A1, but cut, elongated. Yeah, so it looks really small here, but each piece is actually A1. So I remembered I had like quite a number, like more than 40 pieces here. And drawing, I told you that I was inspired by Tom Main of Morphosis. So this is how his drawing looked like. I think any of my classmates will know my 3rd year drawing looks like that. Not like that in its actual form, but what I extracted from it was the black bar at the bottom and the idea of composite drawing, meaning you have got a section, you have got a plan overlay, and you have got a 3D composite overlay. And with that, I begin to express my architecture design as a student through more complex messages beyond just the plan, section, elevation, etc. And these are some examples, not of mine, because I don't have my work with me, of Tom Main's some of the drawings which I have drawn inspiration from. And of course, analyzing. Just now I talked about Simon Unwin being my favorite, and I used him a lot in my work. And to my right here, you will see a series of diagramming, a series of analysis of subtraction, of how to create space. And this is part of my thesis work when I was a student. And I continue to preach that. And I think this is one piece that I wrote for Architecture 101 on reading, writing, and analyzing. And this, I think, was featured in Architecture Malaysia, trying to share these thoughts with students so that you can actually replicate some of these thoughts in your own work. And as I go throughout my process of teaching, writing articles and things like that, I begin to develop some tools for myself to actually see how I would analyze buildings every time I'm asked to, for example, write an article. And I have begun to frame up this, this diagram, if you like, where architecture, buildings, and spaces are actually made up of many different things, which you can see in this diagram. It may be made up of your personal beliefs, theory of design, contextual conditions. It can also be made up because of cost, time, function, as well as a person's transition in the theory of design. So as I begin to write a lot of articles, I use this particular framework to help me narrate a piece of building easier. And this is actually a research work that I have done together with my then master's student, Hafren Steele, who is now already graduated. And this was a research work, I think done about 2 years ago. And in this particular work, that was when I was able to use Simon Unwin to the fullest. So I was very excited, just like a little girl. And as I finished it and we published some papers, I received an email from Simon Unwin, and I was like, oh my God, my idol emailed me and asked me for the paper. So I have emailed him. And to me, that point was really, really interesting and really fulfilling personally in my personal journey from a student until now. And of course, I have mentioned about writing. So these are some of the pieces that I write. And why I've picked up specifically a few things here. One is you can see actually a piece called Revisiting Tanjung Jara. So I write pieces relating to reports or revisiting buildings. And I also write pieces relating to individual buildings, like what you see to your left. And that really formed a very enriching experience. It's very similar to you going on a site visit to someone's building, and the architect would kind of like share things. And then you will ask some questions, and then you'll go back. And for me, when I go back, I had to write these articles because I'm commissioned to do that. And I go through exactly the same experience as you. It is just that the outcome is slightly different. And as I've mentioned just now, how do I arrive here? Is I arrive here by looking at a lot of magazines and trying to learn from the framework. And then, like what I said earlier, fake it till you make it, and try to learn from those as a framework and not copying from it. And I think I'll just skip this one. I would like to go to the methods. Methods here mean a way of doing something. And for me, these are some of the things which really fascinated me as an architecture student, which is the Golden Section by Le Corbusier. And also I was kind of like fascinated with the deconstructivism folding architecture, with operative design, with some of Bernard Shumi's work, and with some of Peter Eisenman's work. So all these to me were methods, and what I learned from there is to extract the system for the methods. So this is not new. I'm not the first person who extract the system from a method. And here you can see to your left is an ancient building, and to the right is a modern building. And the similarity of the geometry shows you a simple image of abstraction. And similarly, the idea of the golden section, the idea of a series of narration, they all come together in this very interesting project. And if you have not seen or heard of this project, I would highly encourage you to actually go and have a look at it. It's actually Terragni's Dantium. It's not a built work. It was actually derived by Dante's Divine Comedy, and what it taught me was it taught me about kit of parts. You know how when your lecturer will always tell you, maybe you should just explore the column, the planes, the light, the reflection, the narrative, and they all to me collides in this one project. Because it's from a literary source, it's translated into a hypothetical project, and it really encapsulates the pure essence of what architecture and space is made of. Of course, there are other things that have interested me, which is diagramming, on how to actually diagram a plan, a section, and how to actually use it in a composite or a three-dimensional manner, and also diagramming. So when I was teaching, I actually wrote an article in Architecture Malaysia called The Silent Power of Diagrams. So this one actually was meant for architecture students, talking about 𝐕𝐞𝐫𝐬𝐧𝐼's approach to winning competitions or winning jobs because of the power of its diagrammatic narrative. So to me, diagramming have allowed me to do many, many things. But I think probably one tip that we need to understand is what and how to diagram, which I think a lot of students misses the point because they just diagram what they were taught in class, which is massing, solid and void, structure. Well, sometimes that's important, but usually there are other things which are more important that is aligned to what you're trying to explore. And of course, I was also very interested in the kit of parts, which was introduced via the work of John Haddock, not a very popular person in terms of his presence in the architecture community, especially in Malaysia, into architecture students. But it really fascinates me to actually break architecture into small parts. Okay, so that was point number 3, fake it till you make it. So I have attempted to, I won't say fake, but adapt or distill to its neatest manner 8 different things that have helped me in my architecture school. And of course, the 4th tipping point is creativity. We all know that architects need to be creative, but let's step back and ask the question, what is creativity? Actually, many of us do not know what is creativity. Yeah, and I have actually to my left, write 4 points on creativity. The first one, exploring possibilities. If you're doing a design and you are actually not exploring, you're just creating one option just to make your lecturer happy and just do a checklisting, that is not creativity because you have not given options. Take informed risk Students who take informed risk usually have higher chance to ace it in architecture school. And of course, you have to be able to argue and defend for what you believe. And at the end of the day, your product is actually novel. This means creativity. And actually, even in schools in overseas, they knew what creativity was. And actually, this was taken from a website of a school called the Nadine School. And it says here, creativity is about problem solving, lateral thinking, imagination, storytelling, and flexibility. So when we equate that to architecture, of course, architects have written about creativity. And a few of the famous people are like Brian Lawson, who writes about creativity. Basically, in a nutshell, I just want to sum it up that creativity is about convergent thinking, meaning be able to logically think and solve a problem. And divergent thinking, meaning be able to think from many different perspectives and exploring it as an iterative or recursive process. And the architect's brain is actually quite unique. So you actually need to train your brain to do these two things. And I think a tipping point will actually happen when you are able to combine both your linear thought or logical thinking and that of divergent thinking, meaning thinking from many different perspectives. Okay, so this is Brian Lawson's book on how designers think. And basically it is trying to bust the myth that actually creativity is born. Creativity is a skill that can be learned. So this is what the book argues for. And of course, we have Edward de Bono. Possibly you have heard of him in your high school or when you are doing your foundation and etc. And this is about the balance between the lateral thinking, which is the logical thinking, and the divergent thinking. And what does divergent thinking means? If you have 6 hats, each hat means something. And every time you explore a design, try wearing different hats at that one time. And this is exactly what divergent thinking is about. And for me, how did it work? For me, this means that I need to know how to ask the right question so that I can have a balance between the lateral or the linear as well as the divergent thinking. I remember in my semester 1 when I had to do this kind of like I think an object to hold some studio tools. I can't remember what question I was asking then, but probably I wasn't asking any questions because I didn't know I had to. And for now, if I were to ask the question, I would have asked, how does it hold a pen? You could hold it differently, and I would like to explore a pen holder that holds a pen in a specific way. And with that clarity, I then work my design towards that. And similarly, in my 4th year or so, I begin to ask another question. You can see that the question goes deeper and deeper. Yeah. How do we create a balance between poetic and abstraction in design, whilst characterizing a sense of place? This was the question that I asked in one of my design projects. And lastly, the last question there is just one of the questions that I research on now. For example, how do we build communities through the intervention of third place in urban placemaking? So what I'm trying to say here is, with both the linear as well as the divergent thinking, you need to make sure that the question allows you to create a balance between that. And one question starter that is very useful for you is start with how and not what. Yeah. And the tipping point number 5, I'm just mindful of the time. Tipping point number 5 is prove your purpose or your intent. Persuasion counts. for me, a plan or a manifesto is not enough. As a teacher of architecture, as a module lecturer in design studio, I have witnessed this a million times. You give a student 15 minutes to present, 10 minutes he's still talking, and you still wonder what the student is talking about. So that is not what you're supposed to do. You need to just tell the plan and show how the success or your end product looks like. I have just put two images to prove what I mean here. For example, if you said, my work explores mystery, the product should display mystery. Full stop. Nobody is going to question you. Of course, they will question you on function, etc., whatnot. But this is one of the things that is important for you. You don't go on and on and on about what mystery is, right? You explain that through your design. So you need to flip the approach of how you take, especially when you are doing a presentation of your design. And secondly, this is my second image to show that you have to prove your intent. This is my favorite. I love the Tiffany & Co. Gary's series. I used to have one, but I can't remember where I put it now. And this is Gary's jewelry design for Tiffany & Co. If I tell you this is Gary's work, okay, you will go like, yeah, I believe it, right? So that is what I mean by proving the intent, because you already know what Gary's work is like. Of course, we don't discuss about the idea of form and etc. We just accept the fact that this is his intent, his approach, and he consistently pushed through that manifesto, that idea or that ideal. I think is what creates between the tipping point of a mediocre and a good student. And point number 6, I'm almost reaching to the end of the 7th point. Point number 6, I failed this. Okay, so that's why I must make sure I put it in this presentation, because I know that this is for architecture student. I was in my son, somehow or other, I was walking through and my son was having an online class and I overheard that it was about group work. And I heard one of his classmates say to the teacher, Miss, can we actually, join groups with our friends? Because since they are our friends, we can actually work with them better. And I didn't know what was the outcome, but this was what I overheard. And I then recall how my group work was. Yeah. So if there's any one of my group members listening to me right now, who was my classmate, this probably doesn't sound nice to you. I did all the work, and I'm sure most of you here would be either on the side where you did all the work or on the side that you think, oh, I didn't do enough, or you may be even thinking, great, I don't really have to do anything. And this is human nature. But I was really unlucky that I was always in a group that I had to do all the work. And now I try not to. And that's why I must share this point to you. Choosing your friend versus choosing your team. Never choose your friend unless they have a skill set that you want to. Okay. I just gave you an example. For example, if you are going to do a project which is about setting up a business, your architecture business, you are very good in design, but you need to do a business plan and you have no idea how to do it. You can design all the things, you can design the letterhead, how your business logo would be like. What do you think will be a good team member? Someone that's really good in financial knowledge, someone who is really good in persuasive skills, networking skills, someone who is really good in social media, for example. So don't choose your teammate because they are your friend. And that's exactly what I did. I should have chosen my teammates who who fill up my weaknesses. So in other words, knowing your strength and knowing your weakness is as important. And lastly, point number 7, finding your voice, knowing yourself. And sometimes you may hear the word reflection in action. In every action you take, reflect. Reflecting means not being emo. Yeah, we are not talking about being emotional or cry or whatnot. Reflecting meaning thinking how it was like and knowing what to do now. And that's reflection in action. And for me, now that I look back, and basically when I was preparing this presentation, what it allowed me to do was reflection in action. I have rewind 2 decades or more, and I come to realize, or maybe perhaps find the answer of what is the purpose of my life, or what is my life purpose, which I've been constantly asking for the past 3 years. Maybe it's midlife crisis or it's just me. And I am now very clear my role in the bigger picture, not only my role as a teacher or whatnot, but it's much bigger. And my purpose is to curate experiences for many different contexts of people and of places. And whatever I do in terms of the research that I do, things that I teach, the learning experiences or the strategies of how I teach, they all lands on this particular purpose. And it is not easy to find, but if you already know, I would say that I'm not a very ambitious person when I was really young, not that I am now, but for people who already are very motivated when they are young, you will tend to have found your voice very, very much earlier, maybe even as a child. So finding your voice is actually very, very important. So I would just like to sum up before I end. I have actually shared with you 7 points to get from dread to great. And through these 7 points, of course, I have bounced it off from my own experience. And these points were not there as I was experiencing it. I was, of course, as blurred as you are. However, when I reflected, I can nicely park those experiences to these 7 points that I could now deliver to you to actually make your life as an architecture student better. Can I guarantee that? I think I can guarantee that if you do one of this, certain part of your life, maybe not all, as an architecture student will definitely be better, especially point number 3, which is fake it till you make it. I would like to end with a quote from Simon Sinek. Working hard for something we don't care about is stress. Working hard for something we love is called passion. Those 7 points won't mean a thing if this is not what you believe in. If architecture is not a passion for you, what I just said in the 7 points, you don't have to listen. Because if you are not passionate, no matter what you do, it's not going to work. Yeah? And lastly, I would like to end with this image that really resonates what I believe architecture is about. Yeah. In the past, I would put the brain first, then the hand, then the heart. But in the last few years, I tend to put the heart first. So this is not love, yeah. You don't have to love architecture, but you have to be passionate about it. For me, the heart is empathy. As an architect, I have learned that having a lot of empathy is important in order to actually be able to take perspective of things. Empathy, to a certain extent, is like divergent thinking, where you move through different perspectives of how people see that one thing. And the second thing to me that defines architecture is the cognitive mind, the way you think, the way you analyze, and these are all the mental skills that you have. And the third most important thing is the hand. The hand here is suggestive of make, the idea of making. At times, of course, not literally making something. Of course, as you start, you have to use your hand, but at the end, especially your generation now, perhaps you will be exploring something a little bit more digital, a little bit more robotic and things like that. So in short, these three things forms the empathetic, cognitive, and the idea of the craftsmanship in what defines what architecture is about. Yeah, so with that, I would like to end my session. So thank you very much.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Veronica. That was really wonderful, very rich, very informative. And to me, at least to me itself, I get to view it from a different perspective, from your perspective, how you actually approach this architecture journey as a student. So I learned a lot as well. So thank you so much, and I hope everyone enjoys it and gain a lot from Dr. Veronica. Thank you. So shall we move on to the Q&A session? Anyone have any questions? Please write down. Please just type down on the chat session, the chat box below. Usually the first question takes quite a while, but then after that you can see a lot of questions coming up. We do have questions from our Facebook. Okay, so I'll read it out to you. Right. There is one from Salam Jamal from Facebook. Can you give more examples on point number 3?
More examples? Is there a specific
personal experience?
Which one would that be? Because in point number 3, there are 8. Maybe I can just pick anyone, I guess.
Yeah, maybe anyone. Right. Maybe your personal experience or just anyone.
Okay, I would like to choose perhaps thinking. So when I said fake it till you make it, like what I mentioned just now, it's actually a way, a phrase used highly in psychology where you have to practice it until you and the thing is one. Okay, that's generally the concept. So for example, let's take thinking. I personally have been interested in the works of generally phenomenological thinking, means the belief that lived experience is most important, and that's what we need to aim for when we design. So one example that I have done in my architecture school was whatever project that I did, I will create a narrative or a storyline for the design project, starting from the point that you enter or you arrive at the building. Okay, and I will take like 8 to 10 shots. Okay, as you're walking into a building, let's say I will take 8 shots. Okay, for that 8 shots, I will actually write a short phrase to define the experience of those 8 shots. And I will think of a way to actually express those in perspectives. And how do I know I have to do that? Nobody tells me to, right? And that is because I have leverage a lot on the work of Stephen Hall. So I look at his work, I look at how he talks about his work, I look at his design philosophy, I look at how he reads urban space, I look at how he expresses his design. He used watercolor, but I didn't use watercolor. I generally use the technique that relates to the project itself. So that was one example of how I actually use the experiential aspect of thinking in my design work. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but that's one example that I could share. How does it impact me today? Actually, in the past 7 or 8 years, I've been doing a lot of research on sense of place. And that impacted me until I was doing my PhD. It was on the same thing, yeah, but just a different perspective. So actually it fully impacted me, I would say, because I'm kind of like still doing these things today. For example, when I'm actually researching about a town or a place, I will tend to read it that way. And as I write, for example, journal papers or magazines, articles for magazine, I would also tend to think the same way. I may not express the same way because the scope or the purpose of the outcome may not be the same, but I think the same way.
All right. So I hope that actually answers that actually gives an idea on the point itself for Salam Jamal. There's another question from Cha Yvonne as well from Facebook. How does architecture school, especially in Malaysia, encourage creativity when the briefs handed to students are rigid and the grades are at risk when the design breaks the rules of the briefs? How does a student balance the brief taking and keeping their designs within the brief?
The short answer is use the 7 points. The long answer, the long answer is, I mean, the 7 points is not geographically impacted. Yeah, no matter where you are, you can actually use the 7 points. But I think Yvonne, probably a Taylor student, in Malaysia, generally, I agree with you. However, you will also notice that generally in the first 2 or 3 years of architecture education, it's particularly rigid because it teaches you mostly the fundamental things. And generally, you will not soar. Of course, we have people that straight away come in semester 1, they are A student and they remain A forever. Those don't happen all the time. Probably 1 in 100, and that's lucky. We are now talking about the average, right? The average student. Generally, students don't soar when they're in first year, second year. They begin to find their voice in the third year. And the 7 points that I mentioned just now, you may not be able to apply it in your first year because you don't have a chance to do that. Because you don't even know what site analysis is, how to use phenomenology to read a site, right? So generally, you may not have that much chance to do it in your first and second year. But when the brief gets into the fourth year, the fifth year, typically the masters, you will see that they are a little bit open-ended and they ask you to ask a question, right? So inquiry. And that is when you can kind of like shine. And for me, the tipping point was my third year, second semester. Yeah, so I'm not sure if I answered the question, but if you find that you are at a tipping point where you're in third year, or maybe you already finished and never found the tipping point, I'm so sorry. You can use it now, and I'm sure you'll find the tipping point.
Also, another question, again, is from Yvonne. She said, is ABCD, I think she's referring to the grade, ABCD, relevant in architecture school? Architecture is quite subjective. Should we adopt a simple pass/fail system instead? Because the AA, I think AA is the AA School of Architecture in British, I think, adopts a simple pass/fail system as well.
Okay, you're asking me a very challenging question, Yvonne. I also know in Australia, when I was studying architecture, University of Western Australia also uses a pass-fail, and there's no assessment at all. The only assessment is portfolio. Okay, so you imagine you go through your 14 weeks or one semester without anything, and then you go portfolio, pass-fail. If you're asking me, can we do that in Malaysia? The answer is no. Because of various reasons, because of university policy, because of government policy and whatnot. So the straight answer to that is in Malaysia, typically that will not happen. And funnily enough, based on my observation, even now, whatever, including internship, it appears to me there is this tendency of people asking it to be graded in Malaysia, yeah, versus a pass-fail. So the a scale to how a student is doing. The second question, does it really matter? Does the A, B, C, D really matter? Well, you have to ask the employer. My husband runs interior design practice, so maybe I can speak on behalf of him. A, B, C, Ds. I think the first thing is your portfolio. Then the A, B, C, Ds. But before the A, B, C, Ds will be your character, your attitude. No one will look for knowledge, right? Knowledge is just a vehicle, and knowledge expires. So for me, I'm speaking from a personal perspective. And it's not supported by data. For me, if I run an architecture office and I get a bunch of CVs, I will tend to go for CGPAs of 3. That's what I will go for. Will I go for 3.85? No, I won't. Why? Because students with 3.85, I'm saying in Malaysian context, yeah, may not apply to other countries. They are idealists. I am an idealist. Okay, so I tend to have divergent thinking, so I normally wear a lot of different hats. And if I wear the practice hat, I would say I'll just take 3. If you can show me good attitude, you want to learn, your portfolio is great, I can see you have some individuality, perfect. But if I want to find someone who is able to let's say, make a beautiful publication, right? And therefore, I will actually look for a portfolio that allows me to do that. So for employment purpose, the A, B, C, Ds, of course, you not F and not D. And so B plus to me is the most ideal CGPA. But that's my personal opinion. Yeah, so I'm not sure if I answered Yvonne's question.
I hope that answers Yvonne's questions. Both of her questions are really interesting and somewhat challenging as well. For now, I think let me check on the chat box, the chat section. It's no one. Okay, no one's asking any questions.
Hello. Hello.
All right. Hello, Haziq. Is it?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. You have any questions?
I have a quick question. Before that, I
Yeah, sure.
introduce myself. I'm Muhammad Haziq Azhari. Completed my bachelor's in architecture last year, and currently doing my master's in architecture at University of Sydney. Just comments. Um, I have a question that have you ever been in a situation where you have overwhelming materials to read or analyze, and how you manage and documented them, especially before tutorial with lectures? Thank you.
When I was in, do you mean dissertation? No, you mean design.
No, design, yes.
Design, okay. Honestly, my answer is it's not overwhelming in terms of quantity. Not like there's 100 things that I have to read, but it's overwhelming in content. I don't understand what I read. It was really difficult. And personally, at that time, I was really intimidated. I was like, what if I look really stupid in front of my lecturer? Oh my God, I'm going to embarrass myself. But actually, one important point is if you do not interpret it totally wrong, there is no one interpretation that cannot be accepted. So I have learned that along the way as well. So the first time where that situation happens, I will go and I will kind of like say very softly, sometimes when it's not really, I'm not really confident. And my lecturer will be like, all right, okay. Yeah, so next week, maybe you can look at these two books and just, maybe you can come with a plan. And I was like, oh, okay. It was that easy. So I think as long as we are clear of what we are extracting and we are not distorting that interpretation, and when I said that, I mean reading something, like reading a piece of writing by someone, which I then want to see how I can translate it to my work. I think I come to learn that it is part of the process that everyone goes through. And even today, I still have the same feeling, right? Because I do research, and I can tell you, all my colleagues, we are human, right? How do I know exactly what this other person is writing about when I read one paper out of 20 of this person, right? So I think it's part of the process, and you will build with time. So the first part is make sure you just do your part, and more so is how you translate that and how it shaped your thought, more than whether it's a really accurate interpretation, because I don't think an accurate interpretation exists. It's just an interpretation. Right?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, hope that answer Haziq's questions. Really, really good question as well. And there's another question from Kuma. As an architecture student myself, sometimes I would do okay or good in one semester, and then the next semester I wouldn't do too well. Do you have some advice on this? Any advice?
Okay, I think for this, reflecting on that project that allow you to get A is very important, right? And when you reflect on that, you can look at the 7 things or 8 things, sorry, in point number 3, fake it till you make it, and see which one of that 8 you can minus writing, right? Okay. Because in a design, you normally don't write a lot. That's assuming that. The 7 things, and see which one do you think you have done well. So you yourself need to do a little bit of analysis, right? And Why? Because you want to find for you that 20% rule that works for yourself. And you can't nail everything, but you need to know what you work best at, and that 20% that will allow you to score. For me, what is that thing? For me, that thing was knowing the outcome. So what I do is this. I remember in my 3rd year or my 4th year, I can't remember. It was urban, it was something to do with an urban context, and we have to design something. So I had an idea, and what I did is I just keep exploring model making, sketching, going back to model making, sketching, until I arrived at an outcome that roughly show what I intended, right? So just now I showed an image of mystery and that image, so something like that. And then I thought, okay, that's fine. And when I went for tutorial, actually I spent very little time on that. Right? I just spent like 3 days, and my lecturer thought I spent like 2 weeks. And I think that was great. So when that happened, I immediately analyzed, what did I do right? And I realized that was what I did right. And that was the first A that I've gotten. Previously, I got like B. So I make sure I do that again in the next studio. I did that and I got an A, but I also did something different. I made a very, very large model. So being bold, taking risk, and making a statement is important. And it worked, right? So I know, okay, so that worked. So I put it, I remember it. And then later I had the opportunity. So my lecturer said, okay, so this is a practice studio, and you have to actually look at some suppliers, shop drawing or detail, and you have to do the specification for your design. So I chose the biggest section and the hardest one, which is this like kind of like an egg roof, I remember. And I really looked through those shop drawings on my own. I found those that is related, and I did something that is not common. And it worked. So I collected another thing that worked for me, meaning just being very specific to what you're doing rather than very generic. And proving it, showing the process and showing the thinking is important, because I was so emphasizing on, I really want to create this roof. But, you know, with this steel beam length, it cannot. So how do I do that? So when you begin to do something like that, you can almost start to figure out you're actually using creativity. Why? Because you're using your problem solving. You're actually creating something novel. You are taking risk, and you're exploring possibilities. And that's exactly the 4 things that I've mentioned just now in the point on creativity. So as you go along the way, you have to collect these things that work for you. Guma may then ask, what if nothing has ever worked for me? If nothing has ever worked for you, start with one of the things in the fake it till you make it, right? Either you're thinking or you're analyzing. I think nothing beats method and analyzing. Why? Because these 2 things are process, and design is about exploring. So with these 2 things, it gives you a way of exploring. And that is the first part. If you're stuck, I know I used to teach first semester, and it's really difficult. You tell the student and he looks at you and he goes like, okay, so do you understand? Then I'll just say, don't worry. Just go back. Make 5 things. Just make. And the student will come with the 5 things. And normally, I think this has happened to you because it had happened to me as a student. You will just turn the model and you go like, hey, why don't you see it like that? Or you will start tearing something. Oh, I think it looks better like that. And you just do something to it. And I think the thing that you want to prove to students is that you can see things in different perspective. You can change things very quickly. And design is a rapid process at the start. If you don't do all these things, you will remain stuck. You can sit in your room, you will want to think about your ideal space that you're trying to design. You will never get there. And then when assessment comes, what you do? Okay, I just draw a box, I submit. Because you don't have that process. So if you have nothing, just start with making. Just make. Yeah, so that's my best advice to you if you have never just got it, like you have been struggling, you have been every semester you had to resubmit, or you're scraping through, you just have to start making.
Okay, I hope that answers Kumar's question. I think it's almost the end. Maybe I'll go with one last question, which is from myself. So since Dr. Veronica, in one of your point, you state that we'll do things objectively so that it's more, of course, it's more effective, and you tend to it's like a 20-80, right? With a 20% the 80% result. So would you somehow think a bit too fast, where you go towards the last stage, that sometimes you really got the idea of the last thing that, the thing that you wanted to do, you really have that image and you don't really have the process? And how do you usually, is this okay for you? Yeah, that's the question.
Okay, I think I'm a process person. So if it's okay, I don't know whether it's okay or not okay, but that 20%, that 20% for me means knowing what and how to do, and not the doing, right? So the first 20% is perhaps knowing which method I want to use, what is the intent of my final product, not in terms of the shape, the form, or how it will look like, but in terms of whether I'm exploring liminality, or whether I'm exploring a process of abstraction, or whether I'm exploring a process of subtraction, or whether I'm going to use clay models, or am I going to use jelly? I remember one of my friend, he used jelly to make his model. You know the jelly that you eat, and it was really fantastic. Everybody was awed. So I think it's important to strategize, spend that 20%, know what your priority is, so that once you are clear, the doing itself is very easy. I think we all admit when we are drawing, the drawing is not that hard. It's always the starting part, which is really, really a struggle, right? So my 20%, I would say, is not so much of rushing through the process and just squeeze the process into the first 20%, but more of knowing which process and how I would like to go through the process, so that when I'm exploring it, I will be enjoying doing it rather than dreading, doing it. So that's the 20-80 that I have applied.
Which means have somehow like a direction to go, instead of keep struggling which direction to move towards.
Yes, and what method you want to use, whether you want to focus a lot on diagramming, whether you want to focus a lot on creating a space from the perspective of, let's say, verbs like cutting, trimming, splicing, whatever, or you want to focus on creating an experiential journey, or you want to create something from the perspective of programming your space. So you need to know that exactly. Then only you can actually go on to make it in terms of like either making a model or making a drawing, because at the end of the day, what you're trying to achieve is your word and the product, right? The word that you speak when you're selling the idea to your lecturer or to the reviewers, and the outcome. So that's the ultimate goal. So knowing the word and what the product should be like, not in its final form, including the process, will actually make your life much easier.
All right, I see. I got it. Thank you so much, Dr. Veronica. So I guess, I guess this marks the end of our session today. Thank you everyone for joining us on today's online lecture. Thank you so much to our special guest, Dr. Veronica, for sharing her ideas and experience with us. So do keep in touch and follow us on MASA's Instagram and Facebook for more updates. So until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll catch you next time. Have a good day, everyone, and bye-bye.
Bye. See you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.